Alright, so again, I know I'm late on this because I started watching Hannibal last night, but it was at 11 o'clock when it had already finished broadcasting. I recorded it. Um, so I kind of I was tired. I know that's a cheap excuse, but it's the one I'm going with. So when I finally got around to watching it this morning, I was surprised to find that this episode somehow tops the previous two in terms of in terms of emotional investment in the lead characters and and how things will progress for them later on. Because this basically revolves around Will Graham's trial. Now, now what makes this interesting is that they repeatedly try to outsmart the justice system. They try to manipulate it, and you could even argue that there's a bit of commentary going on here because even Will Graham's lawyer, when Will Graham says I'm innocent, his lawyer says, well, innocence is not a verdict, but not guilty is, and and he basically compares the courtroom to advertising. Like we gotta make we gotta make you we gotta make you look like something that the jury wants to buy, um, which is honestly a pretty good point because yeah, if a defendant is coming in accused of something, then yeah, of course there's going to be a predetermined opinion of it, but it's really up to the lawyers to make each verdict sound 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 like either something they want to vote for or something they want to stay away from. So it is like advertising the more I think about it, but that's not the point. The 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 real twist in this episode is that there is another killer out there who is committing murders similar to Will's, but not quite. And I know Will did not really commit these crimes, but that's what he's being accused of. The murders that he is accused of all had mutilations before death. The murderer basically cut up their victim or chopped off limbs of their victim before death. But but really but really this new murder of a bailiff does not match that MO. It does not, or not completely. It's similar because on the surface it has kind of a similar, it looks like a similar murder, but it's ultimately determined that the bailiff was mutilated after he was killed. So Will Graham and his lawyer, much to the reluctance of Dr. Bloom, try and use this as evidence to say that look, Will Graham cannot possibly be the killer because the killer is still out there. But unfortunately, their little trick is picked up on, and it's and it's uh, and it's unfortunately deemed inadmissible. So yeah, yeah, that really leaves the other killer no choice but to actually kill the judge. So they'll basically have to restart the whole trial. So yeah, and on top of that, they have to deal with Katie Purnell, who comes from the general inspector's office, and she really last episode she came to Will saying okay, plead guilty, and not only will you be saved from the death penalty, but I will guarantee you will be comfortable in this asylum, because obviously she does not want him to plead unconscious like his previous defense was going to be, which is also the defense that Dr. Bloom is working on, because that basically says that the FBI made him crazy. The FBI drove him to do these things, and obviously that makes her and a lot of people look bad. So she's kind of in the background pressuring Jack Crawford, who eventually this was actually a really strong moment in the episode where Jack Crawford basically agrees with the unconscious arguments and says, and basically honestly he tells the truth, saying there were a lot of people who warned me that if I pushed Will I would break him, and I blame myself. So, and when he's later questioned about this by Purnell, he basically equates it to never leaving a man behind. So there were a lot of interesting moments like that in this episode, and this actually offered a chance for some of the recurring characters to come back, like Freddie Lounds. They bring Freddie Lounds up, and the prosecutor tries to use her to implicate Will Graham, but then Will Graham's lawyer says, Miss Lowndes, how many times have you been sued for libel? And she's like, 6. So that puts an end to that. So yeah, this was a really strong episode, and unlike the previous 2 episodes, which basically tried to mix, or not mix, but kind of divide time between Will Graham's incarceration and this new color palette killer. This episode solely focused on Will Graham and his trials and tribulations inside the courtroom. So just the fact that they devoted their full running time to that, I think, makes this a much more focused episode. Because while the previous 2 episodes were by no means bad or even unfocused, it did take some doing on the writer's part to appropriately divide time between Will Graham's story and the progress made on the color palette killer. But now that the color palette killer is wrapped up, this felt like a much more streamlined, much more accessible episode from a narrative point of view. So that was one thing I liked about it, the fact that they weren't kind of fighting for screen time with a new killer. Well, technically there was a killer here, but they weren't necessarily trying to solve the murders. They were trying to get the murders. They were trying to match the murders to Will Graham's murders, but I digress. But I liked how they were really, basically throughout this entire episode, trying to manipulate the justice system to rule in favor of the best possible outcome, because the chances of Will being deemed innocent are next to impossible. I mean, the evidence is just so stacked against him, and his previous. And surprisingly, I also liked the fact that he is really, in this episode, he really started to doubt his earlier accusations about Hannibal Lecter. Mostly because Hannibal, ever since the beginning, has been so eager to help him, along with Dr. Bloom, and he basically wants them still to be friends. So that coupled with Hannibal actually bringing him the case file for this new murder of the bailiff really starts to get Will to doubt, especially considering that there is absolutely no evidence against Hannibal. Of course, there's not going to be any evidence against Hannibal. He's too clean to leave fingerprints or any traces of himself, and any evidence that might be lying around, he's eating. So yeah, there's not going to be any evidence, but Yeah, originally I said that I really hope they do not go for the cheap way out to restore things to status quo, even though that the circumstances of Will and Graham's relationship at this point anyway does not match the relationship set up when Hannibal Lecter is caught in Red Dragon. But here I'm kind of willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because it doesn't seem like Will is completely sure one way or another. And let's be honest, if you are told that you were wrong enough times and you basically have no evidence to support your claim, then you really start to doubt, am I really sane? Did I make a false judgment? So that doubt, coupled with the way Hugh Dancy plays it, really makes for an interesting point in Will's character. Speaking of performances, the acting is still fantastic all across the board. Hugh Dancy is still excellent as Will Graham, although I'm kind of disappointed that he didn't get much to do in this episode. I mean, they were more talking about him than talking to him. But Mads Mikkelsen is still excellent as Hannibal Lecter. He simultaneously plays it the most human, but also the most mysterious. So, and I'm just comparing him to the other Hannibal Lecters here. So he's still excellent. Lawrence Fishburne is still very good as Jack Dawson, or not Jack Dawson. No, Jack Crawford. Lawrence Fishburne is still very good as Jack Crawford. I liked how they portrayed him here. How he was. I liked the metaphor about never leaving a man behind. And I like the fact that he really has a sense of loyalty, and how he's just getting really tired of being around all this death. And what also added to his character, just in terms of the difficulty of the situation, was the fact that they reminded us that his wife is terminally ill. So he's got that to deal with. I mean, he's around death all the time, and his wife is also dying. So this episode, you really did kind of feel sorry for this guy, and he's also being pressured by Purnell, the Cynthia Nixon character. Carolyn DeVernus, I'm hoping that's how you pronounce her name, as Alana Bloom is still very good. I mean, she's still very appealing, not just in terms of looks, but in terms of how she genuinely feels responsible for Will Graham, kind of like Hannibal Lecter, and how her emotional stability is being questioned because Graham's lawyer says weren't you romantically involved with Will Graham? And if anyone in the courtroom gets any hint of that, then whatever defense you've concocted will basically be nullified because you will have been emotionally compromised. So I like the way that the writers bring that up, and I like the way that Carolyn DeVernus plays that, because she's honestly not sure. She's not sure, but at the same time she knows that she has to put on this professional persona to do the most good. So yeah, this is a very, very strong episode, and it really leaves you questioning what's going to happen next, what's going to happen with Will, because suddenly with these new avenues opening up, and with the whole trial basically starting over, you really have to wonder, is Will going to come out of this unscathed? Is he just going to go back to the asylum? I don't know. I don't know, and I think that's the biggest tribute I can give to this show, is that I don't know what's going to happen. And for a prequel show, that's an impressive feat. For basically throughout this series' entire run, I've been genuinely wondering what's going to happen with these characters because I have not been able to guess, even in the face of even after having seen both Manhunter and Red Dragon. So, I mean, we know that Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal. We know that he's eventually going to be caught, but we just don't know how. We don't know what these characters are going to have to go through. The visual storytelling wasn't quite as strong this time around because there's only so much you can do with a courtroom. But the judge, the dead judge, was an impressively grisly sight. I mean, again, I feel kind of dirty saying this, but there is an art to how quote unquote beautiful they can make these murders, and they seem to be doing a really good job with that. I like the way that there is there is nearly always some poetic meaning to these murders. Like, I think for the judge they say justice is blind, so his head is cut open. I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. This is a very strong episode. Great character moments, great acting, great atmosphere, and great tension. And hopefully they can maintain that for the rest of the season. And hopefully it will get renewed. Because if this does not get renewed, after Two Broke Girls did get renewed, then that will cement my eternal lack of faith for America.